Dear students, welcome into the gender mainstreaming class once more. My name is Osawaz Paul Stephen, your instructor and facilitator of this class. We've looked at the concept of gender in the previous session, the first session. We also looked at the related theories to help us understand the concept of gender. And the previous classes were helping us to ground ourselves into the perspective of gender. The conceptualization was about understanding the perspectives of gender terms or words which are being used across the globe. There's other words which are within this subject of gender. Then the focus on theories was to help us to deepen ourselves in the thinking line or the frameworks, how theories were explaining the emergence of gender and what defines male and female. We looked at gender as a socially grounded understanding of the differences through socialization. We also looked at gender being understood as the physical difference between male and female by the physical makers of gender. And the third aspect, we looked at gender as part of culture, what we call enculturating gender or deepening gender into our cultural values. Those theories were helping us to understand the grounded thinking about the gender. And we said the theories provide a line of thinking, help us to interpret and also internalize the expressions the theories put before us. Now that class, the two classes now are leading us to understanding gender mainstreaming in a more practical sense. And that's what we'll study today. Implemented. How can gender be understood? How can gender be institutionalized? It requires a defined strategy. And this is what we explain an approach. So the gender mainstreaming approaches define the context of how gender is espoused, how gender is being understood, and how it's being institutionalized in a way of life. In the study of gender mainstreaming approaches, we're going to define what brings gender inequality. What brings gender inequality? These are what we have explained, these issues we explained in the previous discussions. So we studied the kind of inequality and how a strategy is made to overcome it or to reduce its magnitude. In the study of gender mainstreaming approaches, we shall look at a specific approach and why it is being used to address which kind of gender gap that we need to address. So each approach indicates the strategy established to fight the inequality that is existing between males and females. So we shall look at the following inequalities. One, we look at the welfare approach, and we shall look at the equity approach, the human rights based approach, the empowerment approach, and poverty approach. These are a few of the approaches, but there are other approaches which they are used by different institutions, organizations to address gender inequality by mainstreaming specific actions and policy decisions. We all want human rights. We look at the right to education. Girls and boys want to desire to be educated, to have education, and education is a right. Health, you have a right to live. You have a right to express yourself. You have a right to participate in different aspects, in different tasks. So the human rights approach is meant to address gaps that males interface, females interface in their social, in their formal and economic, political situation or environment. So the human rights-based approach emphasizes promotion and protection of human rights. When there are a lot of injustices, injustices bring down progress in society. So the rights-based approach was established to identify the different abuses, forms of inequality, forms of discrimination females experience on their daily social life, in their communities, at national level, in the entire world, which are brought by cultural differences. Cultural differences emerge because of sex differences, the values. For example, women in the past were seen to be passers-by, to be passive. They were not respected to participate in leadership of all sorts of, maybe economic leadership, political leadership, and other social leadership, like in religion. Now, there was a high affinity for ladies to also take part. So the right for them to participate results into movements to improve the status quo. This is where the rights-based approach emerged to be a strategy to integrate gender into addressing inequalities in the social, political, and economic environment. As we've talked, it promotes the right of a female to be a leader at different levels, the right of a female to be to participate in religious leadership, to participate in economic leadership, to participate in other forms of leadership by recognizing her right as a human being. And the same is with the male. So in most institutions which implement the right-based approach, they look at injustices, forms of injustices that abuse the right of a male or a female, and in institutionalizing their policies, the aspect of rights takes precedence, and it dominates the implementation of all activities. The welfare approach addresses the basic needs we have as human beings, and this is meant to respond to our practical needs. We have many practical needs. Practical needs are those that we have that make us survive on a daily basis, address our physical, address our material needs we have as human beings. Now, where there is injustice, in terms of us accessing the needs, now the welfare approaches, or an approach to gender mainstreaming, is the one which addresses this. Education is all being considered by many as a road to success in one's life. So it is a need. It's a need for the girl child to have training, to have knowledge, so that she can be able to address her future goals. So it's a need. It's a practical need. The need to accessing all forms of foods. In the past, females used not to eat certain kind of foods in their diets. They were apportioned to males. So food is a practical need for all of us. So organizations use the welfare approach to look at the gender differences, gender inequalities in terms of needs, and use this to address those concerns. The equity approach is more on a strategic level. It addresses the gender needs within the population as a scheme to build capacity of both male and female. Strategic needs are more long-term needs. Long-term needs that we require to improve ourselves, to change the status quo. If we can look at some females were seen as less empowered because they lacked certain kind of skills, which skills they were not trained in. So the strategic needs in gender are meant to improve our status quo and also answer our long-term goals. So there are institutions that in their development plans, institutions that have short-term and long-term development plans institute or program or integrate the equity approach to bring all people at the same footing, despite their differences in terms of sexual appearance. But they consider that even a female can occupy a position of leadership by having certain qualifications. And if he or she has that, he'll go. The empowerment approach builds also on improving the capacity for self-reliance. The anti-poverty approach is a strategy in the development policy to respond to economic problems of males and females. Therefore, you find that institutions bring these approaches as a strategy to mainstream gender, basing on the gaps, basing on the environment that is not responsive, gender responsive, that is not gender sensitive. Now, the approach is integrated in, so an approach is a method you use to make things happen. And in this aspect, gender mainstreaming and approaches are meant to integrate, accommodate gender differences and promote equality and promote positive growth in institutions and in our society. So this is what I've been focusing on. And as a gender student in agroecology, take some time to study these approaches to help yourself understand how are they being used. The institutions approach them, use these approaches differently depending on the environment they are working in. So thank you so much, dear student, for listening to me and for participating in gender mainstreaming in agroecology class. And with our focus today, gender mainstreaming approaches. Have some time to go and familiarize yourself with these approaches and see how are they being applied in different institutions. Our role was to understand them and what they mean, internalize them, and therefore in future you'll be able to learn how to integrate them. In our next class, we shall continue to deepen ourselves, we shall reflect on them, and then to give us a ground to move to another topic of our discussion in gender mainstreaming. Thank you so much. I will see you after this break.